to assist the National Student Financial Aid Scheme to increase and strengthen its administrative capacity. So what has changed is that government will support poor and working class students through an expanded bursary scheme, which replaces the previous loan and partial bursary scheme. Although first-time entering students will not be expected to pay back the cost of their bursaries, they will be expected to meet certain conditions and expectations, including those relating to satisfactory academic performance and service conditions. The exact details of these conditionalities are currently being finalized. I am pleased to announce that good progress has been made since the announcement in 2017 in ensuring that the new bursary scheme is implemented successfully. In the case of TVET colleges, students in all years of study from families earning a gross combined annual income of up to 350,000 Rand and who are registered or enrolled for the National Certificate Vocational and the Report 191 programs at any public TVET college will receive a learning material costs. The increase in funding for 2018-19 will support 458,875 students to receive tuition bursaries. Based on historical data and the enrollment targets for 2018-19, it is estimated that more than 90% of TVET college students will benefit. In addition, enrolled TVET college students who meet the requirements for travel and/or accommodation and meals will also be supported for these. Approximately 50,480 TVET college students will qualify for accommodation and food, and a further 82,600 will qualify for transport allowances. In the case of universities, the full cost of the Department of Higher Education and Training bursary scheme for poor and working class South Africans is being phased in from 2018, starting with first-time entry students from South African families with a gross combined annual income of up to 350,000 Rand. Each year, a new cohort will benefit from the scheme, so an additional cohort. All continuing existing NSFAS-funded university students will receive their funding in 2018 and for the completion of their studies as grants rather than as loans. And this is an important point which is often raised as a query to me. The new funding allocation for first-time entry students is expected to fund approximately 40% or 83,200 of the 208,000 spaces for new entrants at universities in 2018. The final number of students actually funded will only be known later this year, and we will announce those. We have instructed all universities to keep within their enrollment targets, which determines how many students and in which fields of study can be admitted to each university. Over 400,000 potential students applied for the National Student Financial Aid Scheme this year. The scheme is still in the process of integrating the registration data from institutions with its own funding eligibility data. NSFAS will be able to confirm final numbers once all registered students who match the financial eligibility criteria submit the requisite information. I am nevertheless concerned at reports that many students and institutions that have submitted are not yet receiving their allocation. Funding has been advanced to TVET colleges to ensure that enrollments and tuition could continue without delay. Reconciliation of enrolled and funded students is currently underway between the colleges and the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Implementation of the scheme requires significant cooperation between NSFAS and institutions. My department has been working closely with the scheme, with Universities South Africa, the South African Colleges Principals Organization, and student representative councils of universities and TVET colleges to ensure the effective rollout and implementation of the DH bursary scheme in 2018. Again, I wish to thank all stakeholders for their support. In 2017, NSFAS migrated to the new student-centered model. There are still some challenges with finalizing the detail of the 2017 intake, especially where qualifying students have not yet signed their loan agreement forms. I'm aware that some continuing senior students have not yet had their funding finalized for the 2017 academic year. I find this to be unacceptable and have instructed my department and the National Student Financial Aid Scheme to work with institutions to deal with the outstanding cases as a matter of urgency. There are still significant challenges with regards to system integration between the National Student Financial Aid Scheme and institutions. This integration process has affected the submission of registration data to the scheme. The exchange of data is crucial, as this will confirm to NSFAS that students assessed to be eligible for funding in terms of the means test are registered at an institution. So this data integration will also enable NSFAS to generate a bursary agreement form which must be signed by the registered student before funding is allocated to the student. Once agreements are signed, students will receive their funding allocations. And I must point out, Mr. Zwane, that students are saying they have signed, institutions are telling me they have submitted, but students have not received funding. So there is a problem that we must deal with. Some institutions report to me that they've submitted required data, but their students have not received funds. Again, I have instructed NSFAS to urgently address the integration issues and work with the affected institutions. It is crucial that NSFAS finalizes the 2018 funding decisions urgently to ensure that all eligible students are confirmed, bursary agreements are signed, and students get their allowances. I'm very worried that I receive letters from students who indicate that since the academic year began, they've not had their allowances, despite all information being submitted by them, and that as they approach examinations, they find themselves in a very negative situation. There are student organizations who have indicated publicly concerns about allowance payments, and these are being addressed. I intend to release data on beneficiaries during my budget speech in May. I have decided that we must assess all NSFAS processes and systems this year and address all the identified problems which have been brought to our attention. The DHET will ensure that the NSFAS systems are effectively integrated into the colleges and university systems, and that NSFAS staff work closely with financial aid officers at institutional level to address any problems. Every single delay has a real effect on students, on their ability to access accommodation and food, books, and ultimately on their ability to succeed. So we simply cannot fail to distribute funding to students when it is available. And I must say, I know Mr. Zwane and his team have been working really hard to get systems correct and to ensure that we respond to these problems. I wish to assure students that we are attending to these problems, and I urge all of them who haven't to sign their bursary agreements as soon as possible. Any senior students who have not yet signed their 2017 loan agreement forms or schedule of particulars must do so immediately. You have a responsibility to ensure that the institution that supported you is paid. Universities and colleges must work with the National Student Financial Aid Scheme and assist with ensuring that their information technology systems are compatible and that all the data integration issues are dealt with. Doing this will enable you as institutions to support your students better and have their fees paid over to yourselves by the National Student Financial Aid Scheme much sooner. More will be done to ensure success of the NSFAS student-centered model. I have directed NSFAS to ensure that the relationship between the National Student Financial Aid Scheme and the financial aid officers at our institutions is re-established for purposes of ensuring effective implementation of our scheme. We must enable institutions to have staff who can answer all NSFAS-related questions. TVET colleges and universities have also received an increase in their subsidy allocation over the medium-term expenditure framework. I will address this addition in more detail at a later stage, as the additional subsidy provides us with an opportunity to grow more student-centered and successful institutions. So then, the success and sustainability of the Department of Higher Education and Training bursary scheme is dependent on foundations, other government departments, and the private sector continuing to offer bursaries and scholarships to students. So I'd like to urge our partners in government, in not-for-profit organizations, and the private sector to continue their support for students in TVET colleges and universities, as I believe government on its own cannot address all the funding challenges and needs. Student funding is a critical contributor to the success of students in our TVET colleges and universities. I believe as government, we have made an enormous commitment to student support in the form of this new bursary scheme. It's vitally important that we succeed. I call on all stakeholders to work together to ensure the scheme succeeds and that our young people benefit. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to take questions.
Deputy Minister will answer all the questions.
In answering the questions, then the Minister will direct us who's taking the question. Can I see by show of hands if we've got any questions?
So good morning, it's Mark Roughton. I'm for Angela Coppola from CGTN. Sort of a double question for the Minister. Just generally your view on this plan, is it doable? And do we have a deep enough pool of talent coming out of high schools to provide the skills and training needed to grow our economy? And then for the NSFAS Chair, you've been around the tertiary funding question for quite some time. Is this plan sustainable and will it get the job done? And a follow-on to that, what do you think are the key ingredients of this funding model? Is it set in concrete or is it something that could evolve over time? Thank you.
Can we take the second one, Baba?
Good morning, Minister. My name is Babalo from Eyewitness News. Just on the previous question, I think the second question on how it will affect high school students who are going to tertiary. The Minister of Basic Education, in one of her written replies to MPs 2 weeks ago, she confirmed budget cuts in the Eastern Cape, about 300 million, in the Free State, 80 million, and Northwest, 35 million. I'm just checking, are these cuts in any way have anything to do with the additional funding for higher education? And if that's the case, is it a case of robbing from, Paul to pay Peter? And will this not have, an adverse effect on basic education and norms and standards that we all know are issues in provinces like the Eastern Cape?
Okay, Leanne at the back.
Good morning, Leanne Johnson from ENCA. What happens if students drop out? So this is more of a grant than a loan. So is there any recourse that NSFAS or the department can take if students drop out?
Yeah, it looked like it's those that we're having here in Pretoria, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So can I ask the Chair to begin with the sustainability question and possible future models?
Yes, the system, of course, is sustainable, and the Minister has made a statement as part of this briefing that the country can't expect the government to deal with the issue of student funding and support, as well as the funding of the whole system on its own, whether it's a basic education system or the higher education system. That principle applies to both, because as a country we have adopted a cost-sharing model. In other words, a model where, yes, government provides funding to the education system in line with its constitutional responsibilities, but also the involvement of not-for-profit organizations and the private sector continues to be important. And therefore, if you look at the additional funding allocation that was made available and announced by the Minister of Finance in February, as well as just where we are in terms of the number of students or the percentage of students that are covered at both TVET colleges and universities. And obviously we've got to look at this in the context of our fiscal position as a country. And there are a number of adjustments that have been made to make sure that the sector, the higher education sector itself, can be funded. So the system is absolutely sustainable, provided we continue to obviously make sure that there are improvements in efficiencies in the system, provided we can continue to expect other stakeholders to continue to play a role in funding the sector. And when you look at the key ingredients of this scheme, as it was announced in December last year, and obviously there have been further clarifications in terms of the scheme, and the Minister has already made the point that the scheme itself is being phased over a period of 5 years. So we start with the first-time entrants who are funded this year. And obviously that means that the returning students, in other words, those students that were previously funded by NSFAS, as well as those that may not have been funded by NSFAS, but qualify for NSFAS funding under the old rules. In other words, the key there being the household income of 122,000 Rand, those students still continue to be funded. And I think the main change in as far as that is concerned is the fact that whereas there was a loan and a partial bursary before, this year those students are getting a bursary for that component. So the phasing itself and the key ingredients obviously they've changed to the extent that you now have the first-time entrants who get a full bursary. And that bursary covers their tuition, study material, and also goes quite a long way in covering for their meals, for their travel allowances, and so on. And obviously there are still some further details that are being finalized in terms of the additional responsibilities that the students will carry. And there's a question, for instance, which was raised by Leanne. One of the requirements in future, which is still being worked on, is that there will be some community contribution responsibilities that are associated with the fact that those students are getting bursaries. And the details of that obviously are still being worked on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nxasana. I think that the plan is doable. I think it's been designed very well. And it's a scheme that we are able, I think, as a country, to afford. In fact, it's our duty to support the poor and those from the most vulnerable families. As to the matter of the pool of talent, I believe given over 20 years of attempting to improve the quality of basic education in South Africa, we're beginning to see signs of a genuine turnaround. The recent outcomes of various international literacy and numeracy tests suggest that certainly at the foundation and mid phase we are seeing changes at the primary level, which is the kind of change you want to see if you're referring to cementing quality learning and teaching. And the numbers that are emerging post the National Senior Certificate with passes in the key learning languages in mathematics and physical science suggest there are improvements. Not yet at the level we want at the bachelor's passes, but definitely an upturn. So indeed, our children are no different from other children in the world. We have a pool of geniuses, we have some who are average, and we have some who may face challenges. But definitely, we have that talent pool, and I think we must make provision for its further development in the post-school system. Where perhaps we've been inadequate is in the level of diversity of offerings that our system has, and we're working on that through the post-school education and training policy to ensure that you address the wide pool of talent and don't treat people as coming from school as only having universities as the opportunity. So quality colleges, community colleges with diverse offerings, workplace learning, all of these, I think, address that wide pool of population and talent that every country has. Babalo, there were changes in the previous medium-term expenditure framework. As you know, due to our current budgetary position, we had to make a number of changes in the previous 2016-17 medium-term expenditure framework. But none of that seeks to diminish government's investment in education and in health, which are the priority sectors for our government. So basic education continues to receive the most significant slice of government funding. Where there were amounts cut from within the basic education, particularly provincial budgets, were areas where there was significant underspending of infrastructure. And you would see, if you look at the full expenditure framework term, that some of that funding is restored as the years proceed. But there were areas of investment that we needed to address, and we had to make changes in order to address government's priorities. But I repeat, the two significant beneficiaries of funding in our budget are education and health. Education at the basic and health services. While we're not yet at the levels for health of 1% or and above of GDP, we have made, I think, significant inroads. Di, what if students drop out? Oh, DG says he doesn't want to speak.
No, thanks on this one. Leon, on this one, firstly, what we do as a department in respect to students who are financed through NSFAS, we have put together with our institutions measures in place to support them in order to succeed. Through tutoring, coaching, mentoring, and other forms of support that we are able to make available. The study that was conducted by Professor Sevas at the University of Stellenbosch indicated that NSFAS-funded students perform better by 7 times than the students who are just there on their own at our institutions, which is a good indication that the investment that government is making is worth it because they are able to go through the system. Now, in respect to the dropouts, we are working out in fine-tuning the policy, especially that government has increased funding significantly in this area, working out conditionalities that each student would have to meet over and above those that are there at a bare minimum at the present moment. That's why the minister indicated that those conditions would be finalized before the end of this year and ready for implementation in 2019 going forward, which would include, amongst others, reinforcement on the performance, of course, and other variety of certain conditions we think would be important into ensuring that the public money which is invested through these students is worth it and there is value that comes out of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister. Can I check with colleagues in Pretoria if there are any questions? Marshall?
Yes, Chair, we got one question.
Okay, let's go ahead.
Press the mic.
Hi, Lillian Salapisa from the New Age. I just wanted to find out, is the student-centered model really working? Because I know in a few institutions there seems to be a gap between NSFAS and the institutions. I know particularly in UNISA, the students who haven't received their money, even though the information has been sent, and the institution has had to move around the exam dates and everything to make sure that they accommodate the students who haven't received their money, even though the information has been sent. I would have thought that the student-centered model would be that there is direct interaction between NSFAS and the students. So I just wanted to find out, is the student-funded centered rather model really working? Thank you.
That would be all, Chair.
Thank you. I don't know if we can combine it with, yes, Abongile.
Thanks. Abongo Kobogana from the SABC Radio News. Minister, perhaps and to you, Chairperson, Mr. Nxasana, in the context of the broader scheme of things, particularly the issue of the fees must fall movement, would it be fair to say this is the victory to the fees must fall movement, or is this just a mischievous question from my side? Thanks.
Thank you, Yanyan for Pretoria FM. DG, you were speaking about the dropout rate in answer to Leanne's question and about Stellenbosch University Professor Sevas van der finding that NSFAS students are 7 times more likely to succeed than other students. That's remarkable and good, but surely some students will fail. So I sort of want to repeat a question in a sense, because I didn't get the feeling it was clearly answered. If a student were to fail or drop out and with an NSFAS bursary/grant, is that a write-off for government?
I would assume it is a write-off if you drop out. I mean, that's the simple yes and no of the question. However, we can't limit ourselves to saying, yes, they drop out. What the DG was emphasizing is we have put in place measures to limit the level of dropout that there might be, to support students through foundation and other academic support programs to ensure that they succeed. So we provide funding that is ring-fenced to institutions to ensure that such support is provided. And it straddles beyond academic into psychosocial and other forms of support. So this is what the DG was referring to. Our intention, therefore, is to limit the possibility of young people dropping out, because it is a concern. It is a wastage in terms of resources, and so you have to take as many measures as you can to arrest dropouts within institutions. But from time to time they do happen. One of my kids dropped out, sadly, but she then did something positive afterwards. So children do drop out, not all. Are suited for the college or suited for the university or particular programs, and that may happen. But in the larger scheme of things, you must make resources available and support measures to increase the levels of throughput and success. Student-centered model. Mr. Swani, I'm going to let you have your voice here. Is it working? Is there more we should do? And UNISA. And while UNISA students have articulated concerns, this concern is being articulated by young people at UNISO, Fort Hare, and several other institutions that they believe they've submitted, but they're not getting the funding.
Thank you very much, Minister. The student-centered model's aim was to provide a platform through which all students, all potential students apply centrally for funding and at NSFAS, so that the money can follow the student, meaning whenever the student is registered at an institution, we can pay directly to the institution and allowances can be paid directly into the student account. That was the premise of the student-centered model. And part of the student-centered model is that we've had some great success, particularly this year, where we've got up to 410,000 applications at the center, which means we can account for every student that is applied at NSFAS, and also we can account for the student that we are paying funds to at every institution that is there. Additional to that is, once we've been able to sign a contract between the NSFAS as well as the student, we can be able to start dispersing funds on that premise. And that is why one of our challenges at this point, we as NSFAS are saying we would like loan agreement forms to be signed so that we can be able to know that we are paying the right student and the right amount. So those are some of the basis of the relationship between the NSFAS as well as the student. Part of the information exchange is that before we can pay any monies to you, you must have signed a contract. And I think at the moment, that has been one of the biggest challenges that we are facing between ourselves and the students, so that we cannot pay money to an account if a student hasn't signed. And I think that has been a big bottleneck over the last while. So the student-centered model was there to simplify the relationship between NSFAS and the student, as well as the relationship between NSFAS and the institution. It made a lot of sense when it was designed, especially at the time of the loan bursary alignment. But I think right now, with the new policy, as the Minister said, we need to review our systems, our processes, to some extent the way we operate in the realm of students, institutions, as well as NSFAS. So the pronouncement has given us an opportunity to be able to deal those particular issues. In terms of the information that has been shared with NSFAS and money still not being paid, one of the key points that must be noted in that regard is there are thousands of students in the same model that we've been able to successfully pay. There's been some challenges in terms of information reaching us, and that sometimes delays our ability to pay students directly. All of those issues, like the Minister has mentioned, we are dealing with together with the department, together with the institutions, so that we can expedite that very quickly. So to be able to come back and say, is it sustainable, is it still relevant? It is very much relevant, because as NSFAS, we have a responsibility and a duty to make sure that we account for every student that is funded by the state through the NSFAS, and the direct exchange of information between ourselves and the institution remains very key. We are addressing excuse me, we note the issue that we are facing with regards to UNISA and other institutions, but what we'd like the South African public to also note is that at the beginning of the year, The exchange of funds between the institution and NSFAS happens there to enable payment directly to institutions. And the second layer is that we've got institutions that we pay directly to the students. So that is the model at which we operate through our model called SBACs. We've got gaps, but we've made so much progress in terms of making sure that deserving students have been paid for, that the students that are supposed to be studying at the basis of NSFAS are studying. And also we can centralize funding decisions, so we know for sure how many students that qualify to be funded by NSFAS. And I think in essence, we believe that the model is working, but we take the instruction from the minister to go and review, find optimal ways to make it work in the new dispensation of the bursary scheme.
Thank you.
Allow the chairperson to
yes.
add question.
Thank you, Minister. I just wanted to add to the points that Mr. Zwana was making, in that in addressing the gaps in exchange of information and the reconciliation of information, NSFAS has made 2 tranche payments to both universities and TVET colleges to allow them, in certain cases, to even pay allowances to students. If I just, sort of give you a sense, in January, as an example, we paid some 1.5 billion to universities and some almost 387 million to TVET colleges, and we made the second payment. So in total, we've paid to universities about 2.6 billion rand, and UNISA would have been one of the universities that received money as an upfront payment, whilst we're sorting out the reconciliation of the data, because very often, institutions may say, we've sent you data, but maybe the data they've sent is not just the data of NSFAS qualifying students. We still have to go through a whole process of making sure that the data that they've sent is the data of qualifying students, because we found a lot of data which includes data of students that don't qualify in terms of especially the means test. So that reconciliation process is important. And previously, last year, when we introduced the student-centered model, institutions, universities, as well as TVET colleges were sending information to NSFAS in the form of spreadsheets in the main. And you can imagine how complicated it is to try and sift through spreadsheets and reconcile information. That's why we then introduced an automated integration system, which is what the minister in the announcement was talking about. That integration will allow us to make sure that the exchange of information between universities and TVET colleges and NSFAS is accurate, is real-time, and is complete. And that process of integration is not complete, so that the number of institutions with whom we've integrated successfully, if we just look at, for instance, the institutions that are have the largest NSFAS beneficiaries, such as, for instance, the Tshwane University of Technology, where we have thousands of students, and the same applies to universities like UJ. The integration process has worked much, much smoother. But some institutions, for a number of reasons, because the institutions also use different systems, in certain cases that integration is not complete, and we're working on it. We're doing all we can to make sure that that system is a lot more smoother, so that we can ensure that the data and the information is correct, that we're paying to correct registered students at those institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. However, I think it would not be correct to create the impression that institutions are not playing ball and that we are perfect at the scheme, because we're not. There are challenges. There are institutions that have submitted whose information has gone missing. And this is something that we all need to acknowledge. Also, there are institutions that are still owed funds from previous years and that have utilized the upfront funding to cover the gap. for that. But there are, in particular, I think, strong efforts that we need to make with respect to the TVET college sector, because that's where your IT systems tend to be particularly inadequate. The universities are easier to integrate with, but at the level of the TVET college sector, there's a great deal of work that needs to be done, and often when we develop new systems, we assume that ability exists. But when you then have to practically implement, it is patently clear that on a practical level, there's a whole host of investment you need to make in systems development, in human capacity development, in order for successful administrative processes to be in place. And we're working on all of that and are fully alert to the various challenges. The Deputy Minister has had particular experiences, and I really would like him to speak to some of those. GM?
Thank you, Minister. I think essentially we, upon the announcement being made last year, a lot of work was done to ensure that the registration process goes as smoothly as possible. And obviously, there were challenges. There are still challenges, and I think the statement articulates what those challenges are. And I think in the first year of implementation of this policy, all we're saying is we've learned lessons. And that is why the Minister has made certain instructions to both the NSFAS and the department for those challenges to be overcome. And I think central to those challenges is the integration of the systems at the university level, at the schemes level, and how those systems interact with students. And I think the other point, as it relates to UNISA, we should recall that there was a very long, protracted strike at the beginning of the year. And in our discussions with them, I was involved with both the management and the unions. And in our discussion with them, part of the things which they committed to was to move the examinations dates in order to accommodate the strike. So it's not only around the challenges as it relates to the implementation of the bursary scheme, but it's also around the challenges that they've had. Fees must fall. I was a student leader, and part of the things that we had made central in our call for the transformation of higher education was the demand for fee-free higher education. So it's been a long, protracted strike, the culmination of which was what we dubbed as the fees must fall. So I think it's a battle of many generations of students, even pre-1994. And I think it's, not only is it a victory for students, but it's a victory for South Africa that we have this scheme announced. And I hope that, students will take advantage of this policy, that we will ensure that we take responsibility, we attend classes, we pass, we minimize the number of dropouts, because essentially that's what, it's all about. And I think, we have to make sure that the system works. And I've seen student leaders, even post the announcement of the policy, who've worked tirelessly together with the department, the NSFAS, and everybody else to ensure that the implementation of the scheme becomes a success. I hope that responds to your question.
Abong, you seem not to be happy with...
No,
oh, okay. Pretoria. Last chance. We're done. It looks like. Thank you. I think I just need to thank the panel, and the briefing is closed. Thank you.